use they think that they need to use a lot of high-level words. But that's not such a good idea, because your goal isn't to impress the assessor, the examiner, with all the different words you know. You're trying to impress the examiner with the number of the type of words, different types of words that you know, and how well that you can use them in the right context, in the right situation. So the precision of the vocabulary that you use, not just the number of different words. And so sometimes what happens when students try to use lots of different high-level words, they end up not being clear. The examiner can't understand because they're using the wrong words. They're using the wrong words in the wrong context, or the wrong collocation. The words that they use together don't make sense, or it's a word that's not used by native speakers anymore. It might be an old word that's not commonly used or not used in that situation. So, and anyway, there's no real need to use lots of different high-level words. You're only trying to express yourself as fully and clearly as you can. So the best way to increase your vocabulary and range is, we've already talked about, you don't need to learn a lot of new advanced words. Obviously, you do need to learn some words, but it's probably better to learn how to accurately use the vocabulary that you already know. So is this something that you've considered before? You know, there's a lot of words that you know and that you recognize, words that you know the meaning of when you see them in the reading or when you hear them. But have you ever used these words yourself? It's a lot easier to start using more words that you already know the meaning of than it is to learn lots of new words and try to learn their meaning and then how to use them. And so when I mentioned before that you don't need to, it's not so important to try and use lots of high-level words, but more important to use enough vocabulary to express yourself fully and clearly, and importantly to learn how to use to accurately use the vocabulary that you already know, and so you want to focus on the precision of that vocabulary. So it's not so much, oh, I'm trying to use lots of different high-level words to get a high score, that it's more, I want to use enough vocabulary to explain or summarize the discussion between the two students or the lecture, depending on the question. And to do that, you need to make sure that you're using the words in the right context and the situation, for the right context and situation, and the right collocation, which means the words that go together. So it's all about communicating effectively, not so much about showing off your sophisticated language, which is the kind of the attitude that I get with new students. And they tend to have trouble because the examiner doesn't understand them, because they're kind of overreaching, trying to use words that they don't really know how to use. And as far as another thing, because students often ask me about synonyms, so you know that I should use lots of synonyms and paraphrase. I shouldn't say the same word all the time. And that's another thing that students are overemphasizing, and they put too much importance on that. It's not something that native speakers consider that much. They might use the same word repeatedly and not feel there's anything wrong with that. Maybe it's because that word is just ideal for the situation, or maybe that word is being repeated because it's a keyword and it's central to the topic that you're trying to discuss. So I don't think you need to pay so much attention to using synonyms. Obviously, if a synonym occurs to you while you're in the test, then you can use it, but I don't think that you need to put so much emphasis on that. if it's an obviously easy word to use a different word for example, increase, and then you could later say rise or go up, then that's fine. That's not so much work for you. But when you're trying to think of more complex synonyms, then that's not that necessary to put that much time and effort into, and also it can have an effect on your fluency. If you're trying to always come up with synonyms, then it's going to slow you down, and maybe you might hesitate more often. So how can you develop your vocabulary range and precision, accuracy, especially when you're learning new vocabulary or when you're trying to effectively use words that you already know? So the process that I show students is to first go get the Google definition. So just get online, or if you have a dictionary, you can use that. You also want to find out whether it's common or not. So for example, if the meaning, if you maybe I can demonstrate that. If you go to Google and then you might search a word, develop or development, and then you get the first thing that you find is the definition, and also the pronunciation here, which is useful.
Development.
And then the different meanings. It's also good to have a look down at the graph and to see whether it's common or not. You can usually tell because in this case it's common, or it's becoming common, or because it's got that rising graph. If you have the opposite and it's falling, maybe that word's not so common. Also, you can look at the number of results. This is a very high number. If it was only 2 million, then I would be worried about using, maybe that word is not a common word, so no need to try and use it or learn it. You can see the different meanings and synonyms as well on the Google website. Then you go to news, to search news. This is so that you can see quickly, in a few seconds, how native speakers, journalists, are using this word these days. And then you can see sentences with the word in there. And that'll give you an idea of what kind of context it's used in. Obviously it's used a lot in development of countries and developing infrastructure and society and government and that kind of thing. Then you want to learn how to use correct collocation. So you can do that. You can already start to see that here: commercial development, planned development. You can start to see what kind of words go together with the word development, for example, land development. But you can go, there are lots of good sites where you can find out more about collocation. For example, Just the Word, where is it? This website is great. JustTheWord.com. There's hyphens between Just the Word. And then you put the word in there, and then you can see all that. This is from a corpus, a collection of data on words used and how they were used. You can see a massive number of collocations for development, so that's not so common, and most words don't have this many, so this is a special case with the word development. You can see the longer the green line, the more common that collocation is. For example, as a verb, promote development. So you've got verbs, V there, and subject verb development include. Then you might click on one, economic development, and there's 800. You can see 816 examples from real native speaker use context, like newspapers and articles and books and that sort of thing. So a really useful way to see how it's used correctly. So once you've done that, it's time to, once you understand the meaning of the word, whether it's common or not, how it's generally used most often, the common collocations, then it's time to make your own sentences so that you can start making this word part of your active vocabulary. Meaning, so we've gone through that already. So what you can do is, on a daily basis, you might make 5 to 10 sentences using the words, for example, in this case, development, in your own original sentences. This can be a word that you already know, or it could be a new word. The key thing here is the same with grammar development. The sentence must be original, must be doesn't have to be, it must be spoken, sorry, yes, because you're doing the speaking test. You must do this regularly, you must use the word regularly, and must be something that you can relate to. So something in your life, like your family, your job, something that was in the news. And it's got to be something that just occurs to you in your mind. So you don't want to go necessarily searching online or anything for something, although I guess you could do that as an inspiration. The key thing is that you think of the word and then you think of a sentence, and then try to emphasize. That's from the grammar, so I'm going to take that out. Emphasize the word itself. So for example, development, you might make a sentence saying the development of important infrastructure continues to improve, or something. So in Brazil, whatever, in your own country. And then the final point before we finish is that something that's, I think, a lot of students don't realize is you've got to recycle these words. That means you've got to come back to it regularly. Once a week, come back to the words that you did last week, or previous 3 weeks ago, or a month ago. Otherwise, it's going to slip by, and your mind's going to easily forget, well, or have difficulty recalling. That's kind of that's the key to students saying, "Oh, I learnt all these words, but they don't come up when I'm in the test." And that's because they're not deeply learned enough. You've got to constantly come back to them and recycle them. Come back and make another 5 to 10 sentences with that word. Okay, so that's basically the way that the main points of vocabulary and how I teach students about vocabulary and how to improve their vocabulary range and accuracy. And usually I give my students homework with this type of thing, so they might make 5 to 10 sentences with some words that they've chosen, and then they report those sentences to me. They tell me, and I can check them. Okay, so I hope that was useful. If you want to learn more about TOEFL Speaking Teacher, there'll be some links at the bottom there. And if you have any comments, please feel free to ask any questions about vocabulary to me in the chat box at the bottom of the Facebook video here. Thank you.